Hey Patty, good to see you. You're on mute, but that's okay.
Hi. Is that better?
Sure.
I'm sorry it's so nuts.
It's back to school. What do you, I'm not surprised.
Oh my gosh, no, football is new for me and for Patrick. So it's just the schedule is insane. It's such a huge time commitment. I'm blown away. It's going to be my life until November.
It'll go by quick.
It will, it will.
All right. Hey Mark.
Hi, Michelle. I'll be right back.
Yep, no problem.
Okay. We got a quorum tonight, you think?
I think so, but we'll fingers crossed and see what happens.
Okay, great. All right, I'll be right back.
No problem. We need one more. We need one more and then we can get started. Hey Jim. Okay. So why don't we get started? I have 6:31 p.m. Welcome. This is the Housing Production Plan Advisory Subcommittee. Today's Thursday, August 31st, and my name is Michelle Capano. I am chair. Call the meeting to order. Present is Mark Cullinan, Patty Karras, Jim Walsh, and Michael Raworth. Thank you everyone for joining. Tonight we're going to go through, approve our minutes for August 17th, and then we're going to jump right in and continue the discussions on the housing plan and the recommendations, as well as the proposed development sites. If there are any questions that we need to send to MAPC, we'll definitely get those back out to them. And then I also want to start kicking off the discussion on impacts to 3A, and then talk about some of the recent updates some of us have read in the news about non-compliance, the impacts on communities, and what does it mean for Nahant, and certainly develop any questions that we need to get answers to, and then certainly cover any old business or new business. And then I would like to end the meeting by 8:30, and certainly leave time for any public comment. Let's see, who else joined? Lynn Spencer joined, so welcome. And I think I see Tony there, so that's great. And just taking some notes. Okay. All right. I sent the meeting minutes out. I know they were long and I apologize for that, but we went for over almost 3+ hours that last meeting on the 17th. I did include some red line edits because I forgot to do some checking there, but are there any questions or changes to the meeting minutes from August 17th? Jim, you're on mute. You should be able to unmute yourself.
There may be those who have different opinions about that, but I'm now unmuted. So in the minutes, does it say that GLAM is not the focus of MAPC's work with us?
Correct.
That's what
It is
the
not.
language says, and is that a fact?
That is a fact. GLAM is not a focus of the work with MAPC. That work was done separately.
However, we are still considering GLAM as an option, are we
It's an
not?
element into the housing plan. I think we need to consider it.
Okay, I just want to make sure that we haven't thrown that out the window because I think it's very important.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. I think we've talked about this before where in terms of building this plan has a framework, right? And this is a framework that we're using with MAPC is used with other communities. And obviously we know it's not one size fits all, but there are going to be elements to the plan that make sense for Nahant. And this is one of those elements.
Okay, but we're not going to receive any help from MAPC on that issue?
I don't know the answer to that question. We can take that back to them.
Okay, that's just a concern.
Yep.
Also in the minutes, it mentioned that the real estate transfer tax on that topic is that it's being revised now. Is that what it said?
Yeah, so if folks have been reading about that, the real estate transfer tax that's going through the legislature right now. It's in committee. My understanding it's under revision, but it hasn't been approved yet or adopted.
But there is a real estate transfer tax currently, right? That's being revised. Is that true?
So what I understand is this real estate transfer tax is new for property sales over $1 million, where a percentage of that sale is going to go back directly to the cities and towns.
Right, but I thought that the community preservation funds came from that tax. Am I wrong on that?
I'm not, I don't know what that's called. I don't know if Lynn can share any. She's shaking her head no. Lynn, you're on mute. You're still on
You're
mute.
muted.
Nope, still muted. Let me see if I can unmute her.
No, so
Oh, there you go.
so the CPA is a 3% surcharge on real estate tax. It has nothing to do with this new tax.
I see. Okay, thank you, Lynn.
So Lynn, but let me
Hey.
ask this question differently.
Hold on a second. Hold on a second. I thought the state's match did come from that.
Yeah,
fund.
that's what I was going to ask.
The state's match comes from Registry of Deeds filings
Yes.
for
Okay.
real estate. That's different. And sometimes it comes from line items in the state budget.
Right.
So they both function as a form of a tax on real estate transfers, but they're structured through a different statute. So they're easy to confuse, but they are not the same. Correct?
That's well put, Mike.
I can't give that be confused.
I think that the community preservation is a fee on all real estate transactions, and what we're talking about here is a fee on transactions over $1 million, I believe.
Yes, that's
Over
my
$1 million.
So I think there are two different issues.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and the
Can I
other
just go ahead?
I was going to move on to another topic, Mike, so go ahead.
Well, let me elongate on the one you just mentioned. When we talk about GLAM, I take it that we're thinking of GLAM as sort of a shorthand for the 1.5% alternative to the
Right.
number of units. So I just want to make sure that we're in agreement that we are going to contemplate using the 1.5% of land area alternative to a number of units as part of our recommendations. Are we all in agreement about that? In other words, that's not off the table.
Right.
It's not
Correct.
off.
I think we said earlier, I think you hadn't joined yet, Michael, but it's an element into the housing plan. But what we need to confirm with MAPC is that will they assist us on making that, helping us, making sure that we have that calculation correct.
Right. And one other thing I think it would be helpful for them to help us on, if they will do, is exactly what needs to be, assuming it seems favorable to use the 1.5% approach. My understanding is it's not sufficient to simply designate 1.5% of the land area of the town. There has to be something built on it, or at least permitted on it, some further development other than designating raw land. For example, in some worlds, we might be able to reprogram the golf course, and there's more than 1.5% of the town in the land area of the golf course, but simply doing that would not satisfy our obligations under 40B. So
Correct.
assuming that that is correct, we need to understand exactly what needs to be done with whatever 1.5% we're able to scrounge up in order for it to be helpful to us.
Right, but that GLAM, if I understood correctly, was on only developing affordable housing that would be rentals to move the SHI.
Mm,
Well, no,
Not necessarily.
No.
Let me try to.
No.
So let's say you had an acre of land. And if you use that acre of land for affordable housing, then that would count towards the GLAM. However, if, let's say, you develop 20 units on that 1 acre, but only 25% of the units were qualified as affordable, then only 25% of that acre would go towards GLAM. However, if the affordable housing was rental and only 25% of the units on that 1 acre were rental units, all of the units, all of the area would be considered under GLAM.
Got it.
I think I've got that right.
That's the distinction. There's a
yeah,
little,
there's distinctions.
yeah.
well,
there's
there's,
that
there's
little
also one further stipulation that's very important to keep in mind, and that is that if in that scenario where there are market rate units for rent and affordable units mixed in, for the entire development to count for GLAM, it has to be developed under a comprehensive permit. So it has to be essentially a 40 or friendly 40B development.
That's correct, Pat. That's correct.
All right, one more question, so if that's all right.
No, let's go ahead, Jim.
So in the minutes, there was an account of the discussion that we had with a fellow named O'Reilly, who brought up, let's see if I can get this right. It is possible in some way to build in preferential treatment to Nahant residents. And I would just in a parenthesis say that I'm wondering if we could include town residents and or employees, so that it might encourage a fireman or a policeman to move back to Nahant if he could afford to move there.
So if I remember correctly from the discussion, what it would require is some type of bylaw to be implemented, that when a development does come before the town, that we would have it in place that whatever they're building would have to be a certain percentage allocated for preferential treatment that's made up of, and we can define this in a bylaw, Nahant residents, seniors, disabled, veterans, Nahant employees, right? So they would be able to have, you know, an opportunity to bid, rent, buy on a development. But it
That's
would
very
require
good.
bylaw change, or a new bylaw,
That-
excuse me.
That's very important to note. And I would suggest that our work here will not be done competently unless we draft such a bylaw and include it in our report as part of a multi-step process that involves steps, assuming we go a route which involves preference for somebody, Nahant residents, town employees, whatever it might be. We need to make it as simple as possible for the planning board, the selectmen and so forth to take the steps that would achieve the result so that they don't have to replow the same ground that we've plowed. I think we owe it to
so-
them to get that done.
So this may not be good, but it may be good. So we have a planning board meeting coming up, and I did send a note to the chair asking, you know, if we could also discuss proposed bylaws, changes or new bylaws that are coming out of our work that they would need to review and consider. And maybe we can get some also leverage from them in terms of getting them to also help us on it. So more to come, but what I'll do is I'm taking notes as we're talking. I want to make sure one is on the GLAM, the second one on the preferential treatment to make sure that's included in the housing plan. I'll send those notes, you know, in the next day or so back to MAPC to make sure they're included when we get that first draft. Okay.
And we
So
do,
a text vis-a-vis the GLAM, sorry, we need to make very clear what was just discussed, that
Right.
the specific provisions vis-a-vis the advantages of rental property as opposed to property for purchase are laid out very, very clearly, because it is so easy for people to get confused about this stuff. It needs to be laid out with abundant clarity so that whoever reads it understands the advantages of going that way as opposed to outright purchase.
Yep. No, that's great. Okay.
Wait.
Any other questions on the meeting minutes? Sorry, Jim.
So, and just when you asked that question of MAPC, would you CC the planning board too? I mean, O'Reilly
I can do that.
probably bring it up anyway, but just want to make sure that that's part of the ongoing discussions. And it's not sort of sprung on anyone. And we also might have a chance to hear feedback from planning board members or the chair on this whole topic.
Yeah, no, that's very good.
Thank
All
you.
right. Then, if there aren't any more discussions on the meeting minutes, may I have a motion for approval of the meeting minutes for Thursday, August 17th, 2023?
So made.
And is there a second?
Second,
And a second from Michael. Okay. So a roll call vote. Lynn,
Yes.
Patrick,
Yes.
thank you. Jim,
Yep. Yes.
Michael,
aye.
Mark,
Yes.
Patty,
Yes.
Michelle is, the chair is aye, and it passes. So thank you, everybody. Okay. So then the next item on the agenda was to continue discussion on the housing recommendations for inclusion in the housing plan. So I'm gonna pull up the slide that we had previously, that we talked about. Okay. Sure. Okay. So this was the slide that we looked at with our consultants a few weeks ago, that had the locations, and the ones in blue are the ones that have been identified as primary or leading locations. So I wanted to go back to just the discussion on that. We are still comfortable with the plan of these locations, and is there anything else specific about these locations that we need to include in the housing plan?
Well, I would suggest that when, I'm not sure what part of the housing plan we're talking about, but I think our work is not done unless we identify as to each site, and I'll just take the 40B aspect of it right now. Identify as to each site the steps that the town would have to take, and perhaps even our recommendation as to, or our assessment as to the costs that would be involved to make use of the sites for purposes of 40B housing. Actually, 3A doesn't matter because it's zoning and it doesn't have a cost associated with it.
Okay.
But let's take the golf course, I mean, the country club, for example. We need to identify and name and actually probably do a deed search so that there's a clear statement of who the owner is, of the valuation that's assessed on the property, you know, per acre or whatever, how many acres would need to be taken, the steps that would need to be done at town meeting by way of eminent domain to take the property, what we would need to do, you know, the ownership in which we would recommend it be held, such as the Nahant Housing Authority, the probably presumably the friendly 40B steps that would needed to be worked out with some private developer, so that it can be, so that these things can be gamed out in a realistic way, so that the next stage decision makers, whether it be planning board or selectmen, have a realistic idea of the costs and the forks in the road that are going to be involved in each of these sites. And I just mentioned the country club is one. You know, obviously the site over on Greystone Road is not as complicated because the town either owns it or has some greater hooks in it. But I think that you know, those are steps that need to be set out in a way that future decision makers can realistically evaluate which of them makes sense, so as to decide on a realistic path forward.
Okay.
Michelle, I appreciate what Michael has said. I think it is a tall order, but there's wisdom in it, because I do think that there's, for each of these sites, there's going to be, you know, various implications, steps, nuances that people will want to understand. And we all know there's deep concern, if not suspicion, surrounding all this.
Right. I
Right.
think the one thing that sticks out for me, though, like for any development, is we need to have a comprehensive set of design guidelines that, regardless of location, that these guidelines can be applied and they meet within the characteristics of the neighborhood and the town.
Well,
But I
you
don't,
said it. You said
Sure.
it. You are so
the
right.
only thing I don't have really an understanding is if is that going to be a separate work effort that we're going to need to bring in, you know, another firm to help us, you know, complete those specified design guidelines, because it's something that we need to have, you know, on hand. So when we do start an RFI or RFP, we can say, here's the location, here's all the logistical specifications of that location for development, and here are design guidelines. And within those design guidelines, there could be different variables that the developer can select from that will come back to us and say, okay, here are the different, you know, propositions that we have for that location.
I agree with you completely, and also with Lynn. I think it is a tall order. It's a lot of work. Both, I mean, the parts that I outlined and the part that Michelle outlined. However, I don't think that any of this stuff will come to fruition unless that work is done. And I'm not looking for work in particular, but I happen to believe that since we've been together and since we are what we are, it only makes sense that we take up the cudgel and do this work. Because if we don't, somebody else is going to have to, and whoever that somebody else is going to have a huge learning curve that would be repeating what we've already developed and assessed and figured out. So I don't at all diminish the magnitude of what has to be done. I agree completely with Michelle that it has to be done in the way that she outlined. but as much as I hate to make work for myself, I respectfully suggest that the only sensible thing for the town is for us to take the bit in our teeth and do it ourselves.
Michelle, can I jump in for 1 second?
Yes, absolutely.
I don't disagree with anything that's being discussed here. Although I think developing design guidelines is probably beyond the scope of MAPC.
Right.
Yeah, right,
Uh,
yeah.
But I do understand part of the housing production plan, there will be a matrix for every opportunity site and what the constraints of each site is, correct?
Mm-hmm. That's right.
Whether it's wetlands, whether it's town owned or privately owned, those types of issues, right?
Mm-hmm. That's right. So I think some of that work is going to be done for us. I think we need to see what comes out of that work for us to actually make modifications to what they're putting pen to paper to. That's why I'm a little hesitant to like even think about starting something if they're already down that path. I think we need to kind of react to what they put together for us. But if there's something that we think definitely needs to be in there, then we can definitely send that question to them to say,
I
you know, in the opportunity
Well,
matrix, we want to see this.
don't suggest we ought to replow any ground that's already going to be plowed for us. You know, if the MAPC is going to do that, that's great. I don't happen to know it, but I think it ought to be done. And you made an allusion earlier, Michelle, about some other contractor, and I think that's perfectly appropriate. Obviously, there's no budget built in for that yet, but I think that it would be perfectly appropriate for us to ask to have the help of another contractor downstream of MAPC to do the kind of development that you outlined so that we can present a comprehensive decision matrix to.
Yeah, so that's, you know.
I just wanted to add one thing, if I could.
Go ahead, Patrick.
I think, oh yeah, I believe this is the bounds of this plan is generally a 5-year plan.
Mhm.
So I think we've outlined some goals, you know, in terms of wanting to get that, you know, what we think is about 3.5 acres to get to the GLAM, you know, threshold, and then continue, you know, identifying opportunities beyond that in that 5-year time frame. So I think at the very least, you know, what we should be considering here is whether we've identified sites that will get us there, always trying to get a little bit more, and then continue on after that, you know, adding as Nahant grows more affordable housing where possible. So I mean, I think that to me that would be the minimum. You know, what do we want to get to in the next 5 years? And it seems like we want to get to GLAM, we want to get, and for this opportunity sites, we just want to make sure that matches up with our aspirations.
So along with that, do you feel, and this is for any of the members of the committee, like is there 1 or 2 sites that is like the leaning site that if we were asked by the planning board or the board of selectmen to say, this is the number 1 or number 2 site, we should definitely in the next 1 to 3 years, this is what should be the focus of our attention and energy? Is there any one site that sticks out for folks?
Greystone Road.
Yeah.
Well, Greystone Road, and then to the extent that it's not going to be a thorny problem, you know, the country club, that's a big chunk of land, and it's, you know, it's pretty, and it wouldn't necessarily all need to be used, but there's not a lot of use made of a whole lot of that acreage right now.
Right.
So could I just speak to that though? There are real complications associated with that property that has to do with the ownership structure. So we should just be mindful of that. It's not going to be an easy one to crack open, but it's certainly one that we should be looking at closely.
It would
I'd like-
probably have to be eminent domain, honestly.
Yeah.
It's that's the only feasible way forward.
Well, I think that, yeah, you may know more about it than I do, Patrick, but I think it is complicated with the new Nahant Land Company and its structure. So what about the Coast Guard housing site? I mean, what if some of those units get sold, but, you know, We've already got that property. We actually had design guidelines that were developed with a very competent firm.
So would
Just
that
saying.
be something we want to also include as a recommendation in the housing plan to relook at what was currently voted on at the 2021 town meeting and have them amend their work so that the loan is paid off, but the remaining land can be used for affordable housing?
Well,
Okay.
let's make
Can I
clear
ask
what we,
question on that? Mark, what is the feeling now on the Board of Selectmen? If you were able to sell half the acreage and get enough money to pay back the loan, do you think the Board of Selectmen might support developing the rest of it along these lines, glam lines?
I think the Board of Selectmen would support whatever town meeting votes.
Oh, very good. Oh.
Beautiful, Mark.
and so what would the Board of Selectmen recommend that the town vote?
Well, I have to see that article first, Mike.
Yeah. All right.
Well,
but
let's also clarify this current state of affairs. Number one, the most recent town vote that has been in existence gave the selectmen the authority, but not the requirement to sell off the elements of the real estate of the Coast Guard housing. Is that much correct in your understanding, Mark?
Yeah, my understanding is that, let me speak for myself. I don't want to speak for my other colleagues, but I am proceeding under the domain of the existing vote of town meeting.
Which is as I described it or not?
Yes, is to clear the property and sell off the lots and pay off the loan.
Well, wait a minute. It gave the selectmen the authority to do that, but not the obligation, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, and the selectmen have not taken any action other than to recommend that town meeting vote more money in about a month to perform cleaning of the land, correct?
That's correct.
So following up on that, is it the case that the $1 million loan would then be added to the Coast Guard property loan to be paid off? How is that going to be handled?
Two separate borrowing authorities. So under Mass General Law, the loan that was taken out to purchase the property from the federal government, any sales of the property, the proceeds of which have to go to pay off that loan first. That's not necessarily true with another loan.
Okay.
Okay, so that's earmarking of funds that come from the sale.
Yes.
Okay, and all right, so any further recommendation vis-a-vis that land, you'd have to read the warrant article proposed. Okay, great. So that would leave us with the ability to include a recommendation for at least a part of the Coast Guard housing in our most favored sites, correct?
The housing production plan can recommend whatever it chooses, whatever it seems appropriate, I believe.
Okay, but that would not be it would not be a foolish recommendation in light of everything else that's going on, correct?
No, not necessarily. I mean, let's put it this way: regardless of whether the town wants to revisit that or not, regardless of that, the special town meeting is simply to raise the funds to clear the property. So we need to do that regardless of what the town decides to do at the end.
Okay.
Yeah. So I guess what I'm trying to understand from this committee is along with Greystone Road and the country club, is it a leading recommendation back to the consultants to say, for the Coast Guard site, we want to pay off the loan, sell the lots necessary to pay off the loan, and hold back what's remaining for development for affordable housing.
That would be my recommendation.
Okay, I'm getting some nods, so it's a yes. Yes.
I'm
Patty,
sorry,
Patrick, are you any?
I'm sorry,
Go
could
ahead,
you
Michael.
state that again, Michelle?
Yeah,
I didn't.
So what I'm asking of the committee is that a leading recommendation in the housing plan is to look at the Coast Guard site, sell lots to pay off the loan, and hold back what is remaining property to use for affordable housing.
Yeah, and let's also include a recommendation that, assuming that we have to sell property in chunks, that if the sale ends up yielding more than what is needed to pay off the loan, that the balance be set aside for affordable housing.
Okay,
That's a nice twist. Thanks, Mike.
yeah, that is.
Support that.
Nice.
Patty, Patrick, are you guys comfortable with that?
Yeah, I would support that language.
Okay.
Yeah, I would too, Michelle.
Okay.
I would also maybe point out that Goddard Road itself, subject to planning board approval, could be incorporated into the redevelopment. So that would actually maybe aid the GLAM calculation. So
You mean what's currently
Yeah,
under blacktop, the road itself?
yes,
The square footage of the road, yes.
Yes, if the town put all the lots and the road back into one parcel for redevelopment, that could be then that could be included in the GLAM calculation. So that might actually help us get a little bit closer.
Actually, sorry to interrupt. One other thought that occurs to me, I don't know whether the current expectation is to offer these for bids as individual lots or not, individual existing lots or not. But once the dwellings are cleared, even if they're currently held as individual lots, there's no need that those particular lot boundaries need to be observed anymore. And so I would recommend that any disposition of land be done in a coherent chunk at one end or the other of the existing collective parcels, so that you don't have the situation where lots 1, 3, 5, 7, and 9 get sold off to private developers, and you're left with a bunch of disconnected intervening lots, 2, 4, 6, 8, and 10, which are much more difficult to work with.
Good. All right. For the other sites that we haven't talked about, Ward Road, any other thoughts over there? Despite that it's in the wetlands, it's still 4 buildable house lots that could still be done on pilings and, done in a way that still achieves all of the goals that we want to accomplish around affordable housing.
I think it has a number of development constraints, obviously, and I think that
Right.
the MAPC matrix identifies those constraints. My only issue about that is we refer to it as the Wad Road, and I'm not quite sure that's a great description of that property.
Okay.
We should think about that. It's really not Wad Road, right?
I have to go back and look at this map's not that clear. I'd have to actually go
Yeah.
back to the GIS map and see how it's
Oh,
laid
yeah.
out.
Yeah, whether Wad.
Hey, Mark, this is Tony.
Yeah.
Just,
ahead.
yeah, you're right. So, if you're on Fox Hill Road, after the third house on your left, there's a right of way before you go up the hill on the map.
Right.
that then swings around and kind of comes back to Fox Hill Road after Rob Thibault's house.
It's in between Billius and
Do you think? Yeah, and the thing about it, calling about it Ward Road, is that it implies that you'd be going through the pumping station property, which we obviously wouldn't want to give that up. So it wouldn't actually be an extension of Ward Road. It'd be almost like a circle off of Fox Hill.
Well, we just need a better name for it, Tony. I mean, the
I'll
property
leave
is
that
what
up
it
to
is.
the committee. I'll leave that one up to the committee, but I just don't want people to think that like Ward Road would get extended, because I think the town would have concerns about giving, right of access through the pumping station property.
Yeah.
We'll think about that, but
Yeah,
that's
change the name on that. Okay. Let's see here.
Maybe we should have put our heads together once again with respect to the Catholic Church diocese. I mean, the parsonage property and so forth. I don't recall exactly what the constraints were on that or what the last move was. Somebody, I think Mark said it a couple of meetings ago, that the town had been approached by somebody from the church as to whether the town wanted to buy some parcel of the land that is currently in the hands of the church. Did I recall that correctly?
In my previous life, I did have discussions with the Archdiocese regarding this when they were thinking of closing St. Thomas down. And it wasn't much more than I asked them if they would at least notify the town first, if they were considering that, and to have a discussion. And they said that they would.
So that's been a few years ago, right?
Yeah, a lot of years ago. About 10 years ago.
Yeah. And do we have any understanding of whether the diocese has any plans for the parsonage structure? I gather it's not occupied now.
It is occupied. Mm-hmm.
Oh, it is. Okay.
As a resident?
Mark, I may have missed what you said there, but I think we'd have to do a little deed research on that property, because I think where the church is, that land may have been given to the town or given specifically for religious purposes. So the other half, where the housing, where the parsonage is might be different, but we have to do a little, I think that requires a little title research.
I think you're right, Tony.
I thought that the parsonage was just used as an office now, but not occupied as housing.
No, there's a priest that's living there now.
Okay.
So are we looking to remove that from the opportunity sites, or, do some further research to see if there's any current interest in redevelopment? Because I think it would be not great for this committee to put the church on the chopping block without a bit of an update.
I agree. I think that would be very insensitive.
I mean, I would like to consider it an opportunity site. As Tony said, the site would probably have to be divided between the parsonage and the church in the parking lot. So much more work needs to be done there.
So we put it low on the list of opportunity sites.
Correct. Share my screen. Okay. Are there any other sites that we need to talk about?
Well, did we
These
talk
sites-
about Housing Authority South and the Greystone Road property?
So I think for me, I think Greystone Road is a a strong leading opportunity because we already own it. There's 3 acres there, I believe, and we could do, you know, some creative things in terms of affordable housing as well as, you know, not just the rentals or extend the spindrift, but also, owner occupied as well to give people, just, you know, make sure
It's
that
a-
whatever we do fits in that area.
Right. And that's a good example where the design guidelines will be very helpful. They'll
Right.
be critical.
So we think Greystone is still leading. Okay. On the Housing Authority South, I know, and I think Mark agrees that and Emerald Road at some point will need to be modernized. They're running out of life. So, when is, I think, something we don't know, but I think has an opportunity there. It's just that we have to go through, anything that involves those tenants would have to be addressed, right? Relocation, and then they would have first rights to come back once the buildings are done over, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I mean,
And
I don't think
go
it's
ahead.
gonna add much to our sort of GRAM or 40B. Because you're probably not gonna do a lot more development than what's already there. But I do think it's an opportunity we shouldn't miss to take a look at those structures because, like you said, Michelle, they've run their life. And we can do a lot better for that neighborhood with a better designed development than what we currently have, I think.
I think so too. And I still think you could get a few more units in there.
Right.
Yeah, and I think the purpose there of keeping it on the opportunity sites would be more just for grant purposes. So to say this has been identified by the town as an opportunity site. So just to bolster the case. Not really to it's not going to really be it's not going to help us with any compliance numbers, I don't think, significantly, but it may a little bit. But it's definitely helps the case for grants to be able to show some backup materials.
Okay.
I'd like to mention the Nahant Housing Authority. I think we should be clear about their attitude toward all this. Is Dave on? I don't.
No, Dave's not on.
Yeah. My understanding was that at some point, at least, the housing authority, which I understand is an independent entity from the town and everything else, they control themselves. They would not be interested in taking over the management of any additional units. So if anyone is assuming that we could build something that the housing authority would manage, I think we would need to double check with the housing authority on that.
Well, is there anything if the housing authority is an independent organization, standalone, not subject to the governance of the town, then it sounds as if it's an entity that could be replicated to have Nahant Housing Authority 2 that would be constituted and take over the management of whatever we develop next, right?
Well, no, I don't think that's correct, Mike. The representatives that serve on their board are elected by the residents of the town. We support the Nahant Housing through, our taxes to help some of their operating costs. And then obviously they're probably looking through other sources, like CPC or the state or the Fed as well, right? And our resources like DPW maintain those properties as well. So I think it's unfortunately kind of a complicated in terms of trying to say we're going to unwind them. We can't, but I don't feel comfortable saying we need to set up a second housing authority to address our affordable housing plan.
Well, can we go back to the point of they don't want to? Is it a capacity issue? Is it I mean, they haven't elected a housing authority, so every certain number of years that sentiments can change. But if there's some real capacity restraints, like one more unit or 5 more units will put them over the top and, make them unable to manage effectively. That's a different concern. I think that's a
Right.
real issue that we could work with to see how do
Well,
we fund
yeah,
that.
and some of that funding could come through, creating like the Affordable Housing Trust, right? And moving money from CPC into the trust to help support Nahant, the Nahant Housing Authority. I know that their executive director is part-time. So, you're right, Patrick. What's the threshold where, their operating costs go up? And, how do they need to be financially, it comes down to finances. How do they need to be financially supported to take on more? I don't think we can implement any affordable housing without considering rentals or vouchers, right? So that's another alternative. If part of our plan includes that voucher program that Josie had mentioned, where property owners identify their rentals as affordable, and we can help supplement some of that rent through a voucher program, whether it comes from the Affordable Housing Trust or CPC, then those units can also address, moving our SHI up as well.
Well, okay, maybe the housing authority has the attitude that's been described. Let's assume that were baked in and we couldn't do anything by way of elections to change their attitude, and that attitude was seen as a barrier to our complying with 40B. That would be a big problem. And it would seem to me that there must be some other mechanism that's available to towns to take steps to achieve its 40B targets in the face of, if you will, intransigence on the part of a housing authority. I don't know if it's ever been experienced by anybody before, but we ought to find out from MAPC if there's some other mechanism that could be considered, because the attitude that's been described sounds like it's a pretty serious roadblock.
So
Why don't we ask them? Why don't
I
we
think
just
we need to
ask them?
ask them.
Why don't we
Because
just stop this conversation and ask them?
that's right. So
Well, we want to understand what we're asking too. So for instance, when we're looking at that property on Greystone, it's contiguous with apartments that they already have, both the elderly apartments and the family apartments. So if we are thinking about developing that, it's hard to believe that they should not be intimately involved with that. And so I am agreeing that we should carefully ask them what their opinions might be on the thoughts that we're having here.
Fine. Let's move on.
Well, just one more point, if I could. Just, we haven't really said, this is an opportunity site, and we haven't really identified the mechanism. Would it be elderly housing? What kind of development would it be? So there's a lot of different opportunities there.
yeah.
And that should be a conversation that we have with the housing authority. Why don't we
Yeah, I don't
engage
think
them?
we know what the composition would be of that location. There's so many things that could happen over there.
Yeah, I agree.
Is Dave Wilson still on our committee?
He is. I will say that I had reached out to another member of the Nahant Housing Authority looking for advice on representation, and that he would take it to their board and get back to me.
Yeah, so I would agree with Patrick that the discussion about who is control over the housing, whatever housing is developed is down the line. There are all sorts of possibilities that could happen, whether it's a friendly 40B, whether it's assisted living, whether it's subsidized living, whether it's rental or ownership. I mean, there are all sorts of development entities that could come in here. And I think that at this point it's beyond our scope. I think identifying it as opportunity site is about as far as we go at this point.
Yeah, I think that's right. Okay. Are there any sites that we still need to talk about?
What about number 2?
Number 2,
Best
That's
point.
That's a tally. It's not a site number.
yeah, so the number 2
Yeah.
is on Best Point, but I think,
I
what-
understand that, but you got there, didn't you?
yeah, so the Bass Point, I think I think there's a strong conversation around that we need to take consideration of that for 3A, correct? And that there's possible that it could be redeveloped and there could be opportunities of that site changing over time. And that we should definitely, take credit along with, the Edge Hill as well as, compliance towards achieving, 3A. We have locations in town that are already supporting
Yep.
that. Okay.
Good point.
So Michelle, these opportunity sites are both 40B and 3A sites?
No, these are not 3A. These are just
Right.
recommended opportunity sites for 40B.
Okay.
So I'll just reiterate the point I made last time was I believe in an earlier meeting that MAPC had told us that if there were environmental concerns over a site, I think essentially the state didn't want any towns developing designated multifamily zones in like wetlands, just to as a technical compliance, but rather rather a technical compliance, it was actually never going to be developable. So that one of the ways to overcome that would be to designate an area as a opportunity site. So and one of the problems at Bass Point and also the Spring Road business area is that there's some flooding and there's some environmental issues because it's right on near the water. So that was my concern about not having it on this, whether they would look at the map and not look at it. Well, there's actually development there right now, so it's not like we're trying to rezone wetlands or a pond or something. This is actually a developable property. So that would be my only concern here. Otherwise, I don't think it's a near-term opportunity in the next 5 years probably to redevelop. But
You're talking about 3A, right, Patrick?
yeah, but I think having it here would be just to say, hey, we have identified this as an opportunity site for housing. Please don't disregard our effort to rezone this.
It might be well to develop 2 separate charts and label one 40B and one 3A because it's going to be really easy to confuse what's going on.
Well,
Right.
so no, but it's actually not. That's not. I'm trying.
That's what there is.
We're already confused. I guess in the discussion because I'm saying keep it on the housing production plan HPP because MAPC has told us that having it on the housing production plan is one of the ways to overcome the state's concerns about rezoning environmentally, areas that have environmental concerns like flood zones.
Okay. So the slide that we have up is from when we talked a few weeks ago, and this was the proposed 3A study areas. As you can see, Bass Point's not circled where it was labeled on the HPP sites. So I think what we want to do is just affirm that continue to keep Bass Point into the housing plan. And then certainly if something comes up with 3A, then it just reinforces our need that, it also achieves 3A as well.
So why don't we include it on this map?
Because I think that the test, as Patrick was saying, was to get it through the housing plan first, because that has to get done and completed and go before the state. And then this will follow. And if they see that despite, the location, we talk about floodplains, all that stuff. But we're saying it's not a problem, right? There's still development opportunity. You know,
Well, how
then
is-
we can add it to 3A afterwards.
How is that different than, say, Nahant Road?
Road, you mean, on the business district?
Mhm.
Yeah, I had also recommended that we go back to the housing production plan map, the opportunity site, and just include that whole area, all the
The
B1.
business district, the
Yeah,
business
the
district.
business district. Yeah, along the Hunt Road.
Okay. All right, I'm gonna make sure I send a reminder on that one as well. Okay. All right, so I think we're segueing into 3A. So if there's anything, is there anything else we need to talk about for the housing plan?
Could we just bring up the we hadn't, I don't think, maybe I missed discussion on it, but the Knights of Columbus, the Bayside, that whole section there was originally on it's still noted as a site, but we haven't had much discussion on it. I think there was a recommendation to drop it from MAPC, but I just wonder if there was any further discussion warranted there.
I think it's low on my list, and I wouldn't mind dropping it, to be honest with you. If something happens there, it can happen with private development, but I think it's low on our list.
Are there environmental concerns related to those locations over there? Is that
Well,
what
I think
driving-
it's probably in the velocity zone of some sort. I'm not sure if it's in the flood zone or not. Perhaps some of it may be, but it's certainly in the velocity zone.
Means low
Yeah,
on my
well,
list.
It's
As
low,
well.
but
it might have more appeal than because of its proximity to the ocean for a developer than some of the other sites we've been looking at.
Yeah, but will it be affordable? Maybe, it may be appealing for a developer, but it may not get the affordability mark.
Well, that depends on what the constraints the developer is working under. If we do a friendly 40B, they can include a number of market rate units in their development, and they all count toward our 40B tally, right?
wouldn't that be developer driven, not town driven?
Of course, I mean, the developer's got to agree to it, but
Right.
the point is, I mean, the upside for a developer is their ability to make some profit on the overall development, and the way that the statute is structured to allow that is to allow them to produce some market rate units, and the market rate units on a seaside location are likely to be more attractive to sell and produce a greater profit than.
But
What?
don't they already have that ability? Why do we need to include it?
I don't
You mean as
understand.
I mean,
under
if
comprehensive permit?
if the property owner's there, approach the town and say, I'd like to do a friendly 40B, then we can engage with them. I mean,
We could say the same thing about any part sites in town, honestly. We could all the sites that we're identifying here could be currently developed under a comprehensive permit for 40B.
well,
Right,
I think the difference with, say, the Bath Point apartment area is that's already densely developed.
Well, I'm comparing it, let's say, to the country club. The country club is great. It's a nice location. Doesn't have any ocean views. Whereas the site over there where the Bayside is does. And that could be more appealing to a developer and help us get the financial oomph it would take to get some more units added to our tally.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, it goes back to what's the point of putting it on this plan? You know, what is, you know, first of all, we have to think it's a good idea, and then what does it get us? You know, does it move us forward? Does it move the plan forward?
I suggest that it's provided simply another option, another fork in the road at the crossroads that, let's say, the selectmen are going to have to deal with in terms of deciding, you know, where to apply resources, where to apply efforts. And if there's an option to, let's say, put this Bayside site out to bid downstream of a eminent domain taking, and that is appealing to a developer, maybe that becomes more appealing than let's say the country club. And that of course leaves the a lot of decision in the hands of a developer, because they obviously respond to bids or they don't, or request for proposals, I should say.
Well, I just think it's low on my list. I mean, I think it's extremely unlikely that that would be a site for eminent domain, in my opinion, personally. Would I be willing to work with a developer under a friendly 40B? Absolutely. I would do that, but I think it's a little different than the country club. Certainly the ownership makeup of the country club is certainly a lot different than those two sites. And you know, I'm not interested in taking you know, I just think it's unlikely, and I don't know what purpose it really serves. I don't think it's going to go anywhere. I will say that I would certainly engage with a property owner or developer who is interested in doing a friendly 40B there, but beyond that, I'm not sure if it's going anywhere.
So it's on the list, but low.
Yes,
Yes.
very low.
So not taking it off the list, just keeping it on but low, or is that kind of
Yeah, I mean, it's an
that's
opportunity site, right? But it's just low on the list. Like, if you have to think about things that we could, if we had you know, something happened and we could move quickly on, it would probably be not one we could move quickly on versus something that's town-owned land.
I mean, how would
okay?
that be different than any other site in the HUD as an opportunity site? I mean, you could drop a pin in the map and say that's an opportunity site.
Yeah, I think it's probably just a condition of the land, more sizable than other sites and the land ownership.
And
You know,
it doesn't displace any homeowners, you know. It's a couple of businesses.
There's a homeowner there.
Well,
One.
that doesn't mean that homeowner's lot has to be included in any development site.
yeah, I definitely agree. It's not a priority site. I think that's the difference here, right? The blue is identifying the priority sites, the blue shading, and then the other
Blue
sites were
shading
not.
are the priorities.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I think the only thing I would take off is the church itself off this map. Honestly, I'll reiterate that, but you know, leave on the rectory area, if there's talk about that, but or you know, pending some discussion. But you know, so I guess that's the question: is are we leaving everything on here? Is there anything that we're removing? Is that
Well, I think we're removing number 1, right?
yeah, okay,
And we were removing number 4.
the church, yeah.
No, number
Well-
4, Spring Road. That's
Yeah.
over by
Oh.
the,
Yeah, those numbers get to be confusing, don't they?
I think. So I think those are the only ones we removed, but I think everything else is still, you know, opportunities.
Patrick is suggesting we take the church itself off the
Yeah, I
list
think
and
so.
leave the rectory. Yeah.
Yeah, I would agree with Patrick there.
That
I
might
mean,
not be a bad idea. I mean, just because it's so low and I want to avoid any controversy, I mean, I would recommend taking the Bayside Casey and Knights of Columbus off. I mean, it just, I don't think it's worth even putting on there, to be honest with you. I think it's going to cause more problems than not.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Some people object.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. All right, so definitely have follow-up with MAPC, send them these notes, so that's great. Let me just flip over. So let's go, so this was the 3A study areas supported by public input. So I wanted to move into this discussion to see if there was anything else that we needed to talk about around 3A. I know we're gonna have further discussions with them as well, and that will be probably more around either an overlay district or zoning changes in certain areas, and I know there's different opinions around that as well. Notes.
Moving right along.
Yeah, I mean, we can pause this one until we meet back with the consultants next month to talk more about 3A. I'm fine with that. Jim's giving me a yes, so I think I'm gonna start
Can I
getting
just
consensus. Yes,
just
Patrick.
make one comment? And while we have their help in drafting actual bylaws,
Yes.
I think it would benefit the town to get them to help us with as many different areas as possible, for as long as possible. So they may want to focus on some areas, but I think if we can look at, essentially all these areas and try to get them to help us as much as possible to actually draft up some proposals for town meeting, that would be great. It doesn't mean we have to go forward with all of them. They'll go through many rounds of feedback, but if we can not exclude too many up front, that's just my only feedback right now.
so draft a model zoning bylaw amendment to achieve in one or two or three of these areas the effect that's called for by 3A. Is that what you're saying, Patrick?
Yeah, more than one, definitely at least two, and I would say maybe let's push for three, and then that way, maybe we can present them separately to town meeting rather than an all or nothing, you know, ultimatum type
Well,
proposal.
we
I
do. I mean, we're gonna have to get it past the planning board and the selectmen as well, and everybody needs to understand that we don't get over our 3A threshold unless we get a quantum of land sufficient to give us 84 units. I think it is. Isn't that right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
For this phase of the planning, we try to strive for more than that, and if we whittle down to the minimum threshold, then that
Right.
Patrick, were you thinking in terms of
at least we're
these
going to get
bylaws?
to our compliance. So yeah, I think we're just going to end up getting into it. We could end up getting trouble if there's no way to compromise later on.
Yeah, so in terms of proposed changes, would these be just different options? Like, so say, for example, one could just be a complete overlay on the entire town. Another could say, no, instead of an overlay, we're just going to target certain areas and districts in town because those have the greatest opportunity to increase density versus other areas which are already too dense, right? Another option could be, we already have existing density, so let's just amend the zoning in those locations to allow to acknowledge the density that's in existence.
Yeah, and I would start with if we can start with the acknowledgement of the existing density, and if that is compliant with I think the 15 units per acre, which is a fairly dense development. So I'm not sure what I honestly I think we need to help from them MAPC to understand what does that look like?
Well,
What areas of town currently would comply with that?
well, if we've had MAPC running the meter for several months now, if it turns out we've already got a solution, they ought to have told us about it. And let's assume for a moment that we don't have a solution already in hand with existing situations. When you say an overlay district, is that any different from simply amending the zoning bylaw to permit multifamily development everywhere in town?
Well,
My understanding, go ahead, Patrick.
sorry, yeah, I think Michelle, you did mention overlay district, but
Mhm.
it can be either, right? So an overlay is just an overlay of an existing district. It can be less than the total of that district, so it could be a particular area in that district. An overlay doesn't have to be, it could be anything. It doesn't change the underlying zoning regulations. It just allows additional, in this case, additional density in that particular area. So yeah, you could put an overlay for the entire town. You really wouldn't probably call it an overlay at that point. It's just a zoning bylaw.
And amending the zoning bylaw to permit the use of, or to the construction of multifamily dwellings everywhere. That would be 100%. It would be have the effect of doing 100% overlay district, right?
Yeah, and I think you really wouldn't call it an overlay at that point. You would just say it's another bylaw.
It's a whole of, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, an overlay is really meant to be, it's usually, less than the entire district. So it's an overlay in a particular area that's give some additional development regulations that, don't infringe on the underlying district. So,
okay, but I'm sorry, I'm trying to get an understanding of the effect of an overlay district. Let's assume it's less than 100%. Let's assume that the overlay district is Big Nahant and doesn't include Little Nahant. So the overlay district, if it were to be used for 3A purposes, would basically say that any location in Big Nahant is now the bylaw is amended so as to permit multifamily homes, multifamily construction on all of these properties in Big Nahant. Is that hypothetical correct?
Yeah, I think that hypothetical is correct. I think one thing that I would, was thinking about was, what about an overlay? Just so, say you take our business district and you didn't want to extend too far down Spring Road, but you just wanted to have an overlay along Nahant Road. So you could just have an overlay in just for the parcels along Nahant Road that said, yeah, you could build multifamily over storefronts there. By right.
Okay, so the basic, maybe the simplest way to achieving our basic challenge under 3A is to identify sufficient square footage or acreage in Nahant in which we can put in an overlay district that permits multifamily dwellings. It doesn't have to be close to any bus route or anything else. It can be anywhere as long as the aggregate acreage adds up to giving us 84 units, correct?
No, one has nothing to do with the other. The 3A is simply around creating density to allow for multifamily homes. The 40B it has nothing to do with this.
No, I didn't mean to imply 40B at all. 84 is a number associated with 3A.
No, it's not. 84 is associated with 40B.
Yeah.
3A, the only thing with 3A is to allow increased density for multifamily housing where it didn't exist before.
Okay,
well,
but
there was a minimum number that we had to reach. I thought it was in the
3A.
Yeah.
The only thing that I know was 15 units an acre is what
Okay,
is the
okay.
guidance.
But there's a minimum acreage that we would have to achieve in Nahant. I don't remember what it is, but it's some number
There is a number.
that allows 15 families, 15 family multi-family construction, such you can get 15 families per acre.
Yeah, that's within the guidelines of 3A, but that's
Yes,
not.
but
not-
there's a
number.
yeah, there's a number you got to achieve, a minimum acreage or number of units that you've got to achieve in order to satisfy 3A.
I think it's 174. I'm not sure.
Really?
I just be
That's
guessing.
high.
There's
But
a chart. Yeah.
The consultants will be able to tell us that, but we need to understand, what it is, what we need to, because obviously we need to know when we can stop.
Right. Yeah. But again, I think that's where I want to make sure we get that minimum threshold, which I believe you're right. I think it is in the 80s. I think we're getting the two numbers, the 40B numbers and the 3A numbers conflated, but I thought they were both in the 80s. The 40B.
The 40B is like 116 or something like that.
Right.
The total, yeah. Right. Yeah, we just need to go refresh our memories from the spring when we got all these numbers.
Yeah. I'm gonna have to go back and look these up again. Okay. All right, so we know that consultants will be back in a few weeks, and we'll definitely be picking up the topic on.
Michelle, can you go back to the 3A chart?
Yeah. I was trying to pull something up, but let me get that.
We always get tired at this point and somewhat cranky about 3A. I've noticed that as a trend. Anyone else notice that?
Yep.
Yeah.
We need a nap.
Well, Jim's having a snack right now, and I'm not happy about it.
Well, and there are others that aren't home yet, so are making their way home. So
Yeah, exactly. But yes, this is a tricky little thing. So
So I thought the committee was in agreement that we were going to include the Bass Point Apartments in 3A.
yes, we are. That was definitely something we had talked about a few weeks ago, and they are going to be included.
Okay.
yep.
Okay. That's all.
Okay. That was it. All right. Anything? Okay, so we're going to come back to 3A once the consultants come back, and that should be next month. And definitely, hold any other questions. We can, bring those forward, and that would be great. All right, let me just go back to the agenda. All right. So the only other thing is, so I did send folks the articles that have been in the news recently on non-compliance. So hopefully folks are just following what's happening in the news to stay current. We've talked about proposed bylaw changes. So I think I'm just going to move right into old business. Is there any old business before the committee that we need to cover?
Nope.
Okay. Is there any new business the committee would like to talk about? No. All right. Then, okay, so we're gonna move into citizens forum, and citizens will be able to unmute themselves. So I think the first hand I see is Suzanne. I'll just make sure that you can unmute yourself.
Hi, Michelle. Suzanne Macarelli, 15 Little Nahant Road. I know residents are limited to 5 minutes, so I've tried to construct these as yes or no questions. Just a couple things that I'm not clear on that I wanted to get answers from the committee rather than Facebook. So first question, does 3A require actually building multi-units or simply zoning? Thank you.
Is zoning.
Well, that was quick. Okay. Number 2.
Great.
It's like Jeopardy. Okay. Has the state of Massachusetts said that they would eliminate bus service to any city or town that is not in compliance with 3A multi-unit zoning?
No, that has not come out from the state. They're not limiting bus service. However, the state has been under a plan to make changes to bus service over the last number of years. So for example, in Wenham, the town of Wenham, their bus service was eliminated 2 years ago.
Because of this, Michelle?
No, has nothing to do with 3A. It's just part of a separate plan. They're trying to
Oh,
optimize the MBTA. In the town of Danvers, they have reduced bus service. It was something drastic, like 30 or 40%.
Okay. The reason I
But
bring it up is, I'm sorry, Mike.
my understanding is that our obligation to comply with 3A is not driven by the fact that we have a bus line in town. It's driven by the fact that we're adjacent to Lynn.
That's
Right.
correct.
The commuter rail that's not currently running, but may one day run again. But the only reason I bring it up.
Yeah, could I just add to that? It's actually not, we are designated by the state legislature as an MBTA community.
Yep.
So it's not, it's a legal designation. So it has nothing to do with the bus route,
Yep.
other than we do have one. It's just the status.
Because of our proximity to the Lynn commuter rail.
Well, it's whatever the legislature wanted.
Well, it is that
Yeah.
part I do know. It is because of proximity to the commuter rail that in Lynn, which is currently shut down, but could potentially reopen. Okay, well, the only reason I bring that up is there's lots of misinformation on Facebook where people are saying they're going to cut our bus service. We have to vote for this. And I just think that it would be, I just think it's on the committee to clear up misinformation when they see it, even though I know you don't want to respond on Facebook and I completely understand the reasons why. I just don't, I see it repeatedly. And I mean, I can chime in on Facebook. You all know that I'm more than happy to do that. But I just think that having that fear out there with the residents of Nahant that they could lose bus service when you know that is not a consequence is a little unfair to the residents.
Residents
Excellent
should feel
point.
comfortable to email us directly, and we will look at those questions and write back to them with the correct response.
Okay, I'll monitor as well and reply myself, I guess. Okay, so I know we're limited to 5 minutes, so I'm going to go quickly. The 3-acre parcel of town-owned land behind Spindrift between High Street and Greystone Road, is that in a flood zone or a wetland?
Neither. I don't believe.
No? Okay. Does it have any kind of outstanding mortgage or loans?
No.
No,
And has the town voted on any future use?
No.
no.
No. Okay. The GLAM analysis that the Nahant residents paid for in 2022, which I found on the town website, it summarized that the town is only 3.5 acres away from meeting the 1.5% land mass requirement for subsidized housing, which is far less, in my opinion, than 10%. An easier threshold to meet. And again, that's just my opinion. How come in that analysis, the Coast Guard housing lots were listed as the only opportunity in the summary? And why was the similarly sized parcel at Greystone omitted?
Don't know, but we're not bound by those possible errors. I mean, we know the difference. We know that what you've observed is correct. So the fact that the GLAM authors may have gotten it wrong doesn't really hurt anything.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yep. Thank you. Last question. Okay. So Chapter 40B was enacted by the state of Massachusetts in 1969. In the last 54 years, how many 40B developers have built unfriendly or hostile 40B housing developments in Nahant?
Zero. Zero.
Okay.
But the real question is what, this has happened in other communities other than Nahant. So that's why we have reason to be concerned.
Okay.
But it hasn't happened in Nahant.
In 54 years. Okay. Thank you very much. No, that's it. Thank you very much, committee. Thank you, Michelle.
Yep. Dan, I see that you've been patiently waiting, so go ahead.
Let me just say, Michelle, before 40B, I think has been on the books for maybe 12 years. I don't think for 54 years or something. But
Oh, it's 1969.
69, okay, all right,
Well, it may have been amended, so, I mean, the date of it doesn't, yeah.
whatever, but the answer, Suzanne, is 0.
Okay, thank you.
Good
Thank you,
questions.
Suzanne. So, Dana, go ahead. You have the floor.
Hi, Michelle. Can you hear me all right?
Yes.
This question I wanted to
Before you
direct.
start, can you just say your address for the record?
Dana Sheehan, 40 Valley Road. I'm on the Nahant Housing Authority, but I'm speaking for myself here, not for the commissioners on the Housing Authority. But I wanted to ask the committee if they considered the impact on veterans housing in drawing up this plan. I want to give you some data. We have 48 units of public housing in Nahant, and that accommodates only 4 veterans at this point. So I raise it because I'd like the committee to respectfully think about veterans housing. Homelessness in the veteran community is large, and I know some at least 2 cases here in the Nahant within the last year of homeless veterans. So as you develop your plan, I'd like you to consider veterans housing. And one more historical item: the houses that were built on Spring Road and Edward Road, I understand, were built after World War II as veterans housing. And in the 1980s, they were transferred to the Nahant Housing Authority. So it went from veterans housing to low income housing, and the veterans only have 4 of the units now. So that's counting Spindrift and Spring Road and Emerald Road. So, so I want to put it in the form of a question. I've been just making some comments here, but have you considered a veterans housing part of your plan? And if the committee could answer, where are they on the issue of veterans housing, please?
Michelle, let me just jump in. I think we discussed it a little earlier, Dana. And by the way, as someone who grew up in veterans housing on 57 and 56 and 54 Spring Road for my first 10 years of my life, I know how much my family appreciated that opportunity in life. And I think we can include that. I think it's going to require a bylaw. That bylaw could include veterans preference. It could include residents preference. And it could include town employee preference. So that would certainly be on top of my agenda should we entertain such a bylaw.
Thank you, Mark. Anybody else?
No, I was just going to say, we've talked about veterans housing along with all of the other needs for residents in town. The zoning preference has come up, and I think, I echo what Mark has said, that's something, if we can implement that zoning change, it'll be a nice to have to work with developers so they can include that in their development plans.
I just say that I think it would be good, Dana, to follow up on another conversation we've had to find funding that might be available through Congressman Moulton or something like that for veterans housing that we could become eligible for. I'm not sure whether that exists, but I think it needs to be looked into.
Well, Jim, we have looked into it, and some conversations starting, but we don't have a plan. Most of those kind of appropriations need some consultants money to look at it and to evaluate a lot of contingencies. But we're not even close to that. I mean, I think we also have to get the data, and the data is what's the need for veterans housing, and we can do that through surveys. But that, as far as going for an appropriation, that we're not there yet. We need to have it in the plan. So this housing production plan hopefully addresses it in a prominent way. And it sounds like that some members of the committee are up for that. And, I'm sure the veteran community would appreciate that. And that would help us get funding. So it needs to be in the plan first, is what I'm saying.
And
We have quite a bit of data around the housing needs of the town currently. And that was already done for us late last year, early this year. So that's a baseline of what the need is for the town. what we need to do is take that need and identify what percentage that is veterans.
All I want to say is that I'd had a conversation with Dana and John Lazar at some point, and I understood that they were going to be asking assistance from Congressman Hall to get some data on what funds might be available.
And I just wanted to add, I know we've definitely talked about adding veterans preference into our bylaws just to make it clear and mandatory for future, 40B or any affordable housing developments. I did want to ask a question though. Is there a preference now in our current affordable housing inventory, and can we, I think this would be the housing authority could inform us on that. Is there something that we could either model or share some information about how we would model that preference?
Pat, this is Dana. It's in the law, and there's a whole complicated decision tree of preferences. And I can summarize it as veterans have a preference, but it starts with homeless or homelessly or people that are at risk of being homeless or homeless now or might be homeless. And then within that category, if you're a veteran, you go to the top of that category. But then veterans are below it overall. So if you're a veteran in need and you don't have any risk of homelessness, you are behind in the list in terms of preference.
But is that a state default order, or can we override that with local regulations or a bylaw? I mean, I think we've heard from MAPC that we can override with our own bylaw some of those preferences by default. So I'd be interested in exploring that a bit further.
Yes, thank you. And we would as well. It's in the Massachusetts general laws now. And if we can override, so much the better.
So that's definitely something that we can take back to MAPC and work on that. That I feel like can be a quick win, in front of town meeting next year.
Maybe, if it can be done through regulation, that would be even better. Quicker win, maybe with a hearing.
I think we talked about it as being a bylaw that we would propose to establish. I think we were told that we need to get the bylaw or the amendment to the zoning bylaw in place before we create the housing, so as to have it apply to any new housing. Isn't that right? Is that not right?
Yeah, I remember that a little differently. I thought the bylaw would, make it a blanket, impose it as a blanket agreement on any new development, but otherwise it would have been negotiated individually with the SAC. I think that implies that you could have just done it, ahead of that. So the bylaw was really just to make it uniform and obligatory.
Is there any downside to doing it that way that you can think of?
The downside I can see is if developers know that we have these type of bylaws requiring development and preferential for certain requirements in a development, they may not want to look at Nahant as an opportunity. So we have to think about how we selectively put something in place, but not make it overly burdensome to the developer.
Well, sounds like a job for our consultant to advise us on. They must have had experience with this, right?
But the selection criteria shouldn't, put any burden on the developer. It's just really just who gets the housing. It's
no,
the
it's not, I was talking about the
developers
percentage, Patrick. Like, if we said, yeah. But the selection criteria, you're right, shouldn't be a barrier.
Should be indifferent to the developer.
Correct.
So just wanted to emphasize one thing too. I said it before, but I'll just say it again. We have 48 units of public housing with a veteran's preference built into the law, but it's not a good one because the bottom line is there's only 4 veterans in those houses, in those units for the Nahant Housing Authority. So we need something that's strong. And in terms of putting off the developers, I don't know. I don't know if that's actually gonna happen in terms of if you have a veteran's preference. It's got to be pretty common, especially in public developments of housing, or whether it's 40B, I'm not sure. But anyway, I just wanted to say
think
that
we're-
it hasn't worked. It hasn't really worked, the veterans preference in this town. So we want it to work better.
Thank you. Thank you, Dana. Okay, so I have 8:07, still opportunity for members of the public to provide us any questions or feedback. You should be able to unmute yourselves if you have anything.
Hi, this is Cassandra Roy, 42 Spring Road. Can you hear me?
Yes. Hi, Cassandra.
Hi, hello. I was actually just wondering, I came on the call a little bit late, but I noticed that the Spring Road units were still circled on the map. And I believe last call we had discussed that, I think John was misinformed that there was strong public want for that area. So I was wondering why it was still on the map.
So that was material from our meeting several weeks ago that we were just illustrating. In terms of preference and priority, I think the thinking is that those properties are eventually going to run out of life and are going to have to get modernized at some point. Now, I'm not saying it's going to happen in the next 2 or 3 years, but it's something that the town needs to eventually plan for.
Okay, so this would be in the same conversation or a separate conversation? Because again, on the survey, there was, public conversation that they weren't in favor of this.
Right.
So should they live separately, or should they live? I don't see it being a part of this conversation.
Can I just, I think we did say that they weren't a priority.
Right, they're not a priority.
Right, but
so
the
on
fact
the map,
that they're
they
still
highlighted,
on
so
the map. Okay,
As
like I said,
Cassandra,
I jumped on late.
That was material that I was showing
Cassandra.
from several weeks ago that we were just reusing.
Okay,
Cassandra,
that's why I had mentioned I jumped on the call late, so I didn't know if I was missing something, which clearly I was.
I did comment on it. I think it is a low priority because I don't think we're going to be adding, any more units if there was a redevelopment there. But as Michelle said, I think the town really, and the housing authority, really need to begin to think about a better development there. I think those houses have reached their useful life, and I think we can do a better job for the people who live there, and I think we can do a better job for the neighborhood and the town. I don't necessarily think we're going to increase the number of units there, but I hope we can do a better job in the future in what's currently there.
Okay, great, thank you.
Thanks, Cassandra. All right, is there any members of the public that have questions?
I do have one question, Michelle, based on
Yes,
that. So,
Yep.
we, the taxpayers, just spent $45,000 putting new windows into those homes that you just
That's
spoke
right.
of.
Thank you.
So, you wouldn't tear them down now, right? We just spent
No.
$40,000.
So
Suzanne.
in the example, wait a minute, in the example that you're raising, Suzanne, if a modernization project was to happen on public housing where they had just done something like new windows, they would take those windows and repurpose them either for that project or another project. The development projects that are doing modernization are looking to reuse materials when there's been recent upgrades. So I would adamantly, work with the town, to make sure, like that example that you said about the new windows, can they be reused? I wouldn't see why not. Or we would look to try to, market them for reuse and sale and see if we can recoup something financially from them.
Wait a minute, are we talking about tearing something down?
The example,
No.
Mike, is no. The example is if the town was to move forward on redevelopment of Spring Road, for example, and modernize those buildings, which would require probably to tear them down. We just recently spent money to put new windows in. And if something was to happen and we were to get some type of grant or funding and they said, you need to do this location with these parameters, but we just spent money to put new windows in, we would tell the developer, try to preserve and save those windows so they can be reused. Or we would look to, there are programs and agencies where things like doors, windows, appliances can get resold on the market for low income development, or to people who are building a like Habitat or Humanity or something like that. So they
Fair
can be
enough.
reused so that
Okay.
it's not wasted.
This is all highly hypothetical, correct?
Exactly,
Right. Yes,
completely
it is.
Okay.
hypothetical, yes.
Let me just say this. As someone who's been in government most of his life, we all know that the wheels of government spin very slowly. And I
Yeah.
wouldn't be surprised if there's any redevelopment on that site. The useful life of those windows that were put in this
Right.
year would probably be over.
Long,
Run out of
long in the
life by the
tooth,
time we
yes.
get there, yes.
I really didn't want to say that, Mark, but I was thinking the same thing.
We're in agreement, so that's good. Thank you, Suzanne.
Mm.
All right, any other questions or comments from the public or the committee?
Hello.
Hey, Carrie.
Hi, Carrie Collins, 22 Breezeal Terrace. I've been following the meetings, and what I'm getting out of this right now is that you haven't cut the list down at all. Is everything on the table? Because I think the woman from Spring Road was confused because, I mean, I hear it's a low priority, but you're not cutting the list down.
Yeah.
Is that what's happening?
So we took some properties off
Yeah.
the list. Which
So
was-
like,
Yes,
is
there was
like
refinement.
the KFC, the country club, the church, those are those still on the table?
Church is not, the country club is. What else did you say?
Knights of Columbus and Bass
KFC.
Point, and I'm sorry, Bayside we took off.
And Bass Point's off. I think people are confused because there's like some pretty ideal places that could be built, but this list is pretty long. I don't know. I've just been waiting for you guys to cut it down a little bit more, but
So let me just
Okay.
recap again. We took off the Knights of Columbus, the Bayside, we took off the dump, and we took off Flash Road. For the church property, we said we wouldn't consider the church, but we would consider the rectory, but that's actually still low on the list.
okay. And what was my other question? So the Coast Guard housing is on the list, but I kind of get the sense that Mark's saying he's not going to support that if the town wanted that. So that's kind of confusing me also.
So the
um,
proposal, I think what we've discussed is if we can pay off the loan and hold back the property that's Goddard Drive for affordable housing development and include that in our plan, we're hoping that the Board of Selectmen will accept it, but we don't know, right? It has to still go before the Board of Selectmen and the Planning Board. But
So is
we
the,
as a committee, let me finish, we as a committee want to put that in our plan.
okay, so if it's in the plan, so the voting to like, that's gonna be for the special town meeting, is the wording going to include anything that has to do with like not just selling it for 12 lots?
So
Because,
let's separate topics here for a second.
okay,
Special town meeting is all about remediation of the land. So it's
yes,
compliant and we can clean it up and sell the lots. Our housing plan and this topic that we're talking about, Coast Guard, is completely separate and independent. We are not
okay, so, but
presenting,
like,
let me
since
finish.
you have, so I know all of this, but I guess my point is, if it's going to be possibly in your plan, that actually means that the town supports saving the land. Will the selectmen support that also, I guess? And so it's just something I want them to think about, because I'm kind of getting the sense that
Right.
Mark doesn't support that, and it's kind of all connected for me. So
Well, I
We
can't, I
don't
won't
have,
speak for Mark, so let me just
Let me
finish
speak
my
for myself.
thoughts here. Wait,
Michelle,
okay.
let me speak for myself.
Yep.
I said earlier that I will support town meeting vote. If town meeting votes to rescind what they voted for before and choose something different, then that's on the table. What's on the table right now is what we're dealing with.
So for me, I don't want to vote for the town to have the money to clear it, because I have a feeling you guys would take the money and sell it in like lickety split. And so this plan will almost have to like eliminate it because of that. So for me, I'd like to see it be connected some way, that the money is going to be used for the right way to clear it. But because you're saying the town voted for that, which is to build it all, but the town wants half of it built for something else now.
We don't have any
So-
power over the Coast Guard housing.
Right.
We just have the
Right.
power to make recommendations, which will be acted on by the planning board and or the selectmen. And we don't have any power to determine what they do, let alone to determine what town meeting does. So there's only so much that we can do. Our actions are simply recommendations, so that you can
So
relax in terms of. Go ahead.
Okay, no, go ahead.
Well, there's only
I
so
guess
much
that
that we can do.
as a fear as a citizen is that town meeting will vote for that money. The town will get the money and they'll clear it. And because this plan is going to take so long, the town will take it and they'll just sell the plots. So it'll almost be null and void because this plan's going to take so long. So if the plan has nothing to do with that, is there any way that, like, you know what I mean?
So Carrie, our town meeting is coming up in a couple weeks. Our plan is not going to be available until late October.
Yeah.
So when that plan is available, even though, assume they voted it, the vote approves to remediate the property. And our plan includes, an amendment and a change to the Coast Guard housing. The vote in 2021 was to authorize the Board of Selectmen. If they see our plan and our reasons why to make this change, we can only hope the Board of Selectmen will, make a decision
Listen.
that's in the best interest of the town.
Okay. So
Okay.
I guess for me, it's like, I'm personally don't want you to have the money if it means not saving this for something the town needs. But I think that's the only way to stop the town from actually selling them like within like a week.
That's
But
not gonna
that's just
happen.
why I'm thinking, because I'm connecting the two.
Yeah,
You
so
know?
for the town to prepare and sell those lots, they're still probably 6 months or a year away. It still has to go to the Town-Owned Land Study Committee. They have to still RFI or RFP out a realtor. There's still many more steps before we can see a for sale sign on any of those lots. So, all right, so before I go, we have people who've been waiting patiently. Let me wait. Carrie, I'm
Pardon.
gonna move on. We've had other people who would like to speak. I see iPhone Enzo, if you want to unmute yourself. You've not asked any questions or spoke yet, so I'd like to give you the opportunity.
Sure. Could you clarify, Michelle, what was the vote of 2021 for the Coast Guard housing?
It was to authorize the Board of Selectmen to sell the property, divide and sell.
Okay, I have it in front of me, and I noticed that Mark had mentioned that they don't have to sell them. Well, I think a lot of people that voted for this are under the impression that's exactly what we're going to do. And I think not to do what the democratic process dictated is wrong. I think that they need to clear the lots, and I think they need to sell them the way it's stated in I have it right in front of me, the vote. It was supposed to have been done within 2 years. There's limit. They limit the maximum floor to area ratio. I mean, this committee went through a lot. When I was on the Board of Selectmen, we sent out an RFP to sell those lots to a developer.
And so this committee has no power over the disposition
Mike,
of the
I
Coast Guard
understand.
housing.
Hey, Mike, I understand that. Let me finish, okay? Please? Is that okay with you? When I was in the Board of Selectmen, we sent out an RFP. We were told that they were going to, at the 11th hour, they were going to beat the door down to develop it. We had won a non-competitive bid, which was crazy. So the solution was these guys come up with the best solution, that was to sell them. And now we're back at square one, where you want to, you know, you're saying that I heard Mark clearly say that we were going to sell just enough to pay off the loan, and that was what the vote was. That wasn't at the vote. It has nothing to do with paying off. It is to pay off the loan, but it was to make a profit. We've waited almost 30 years to make a profit on that, and to use some of that money to pay off maybe our sewer debt or other things.
Well, let me just jump in, Enzo. Enzo, this is Mark, because you misrepresented me entirely. What I said,
I'm absolutely not.
Let me respond, Enzo. What I said was, town meeting authorized the Board of Selectmen to sell the lots, and that's what I intend to do. To sell the lots and pay off the debt. If the town, and I paraphrase that by saying, if town meeting decides otherwise, then we'll consider that. But I never said I wasn't going to sell it.
I heard you say that. Yes, absolutely. I heard you say that. But prior meetings, it has come up where it has been said that
I said
that it has been said at your meetings that they're only going to sell.
You said I said it. You said I said it.
I have it from your town administrator. I have it from everybody at your meetings, that you were going to sell enough lots to pay off the loan and possibly develop the rest as affordable housing.
If town meeting approves it.
Mark,
how about just taking it off the list if that's not what you want, and that's not what you're saying? Because I'm kind of sick of the lip service. Like, I want truth. If that's what the town wants, just say it.
Well, that's the town
take
voted
it off
for.
the list.
The town clearly voted for that.
But if you just putting it on a list so it'll be null and void in 2 weeks, someone should step up and tell us the truth.
Carrie, now we're knocking at the door of a bond that's due for $2 million. We have to pay that.
You know, my fight was actually for just a park bench from this thing. Okay. I wanted like a pathway, and I was told no. How about one plot for the town? Sell 11 of them. I mean, the affordable housing is connected because you guys are talking about it. Okay. So stop talking about it and take it off the list. Okay. And I'll fight for my park bench again.
Listen, Carrie, you got to read. You have to read the determination that
I'm okay with selling the lots, and so, but I want some truth here. I would like 11, so there's a park bench. How about that? Okay, instead of seeing this like fake list of potential places for affordable housing, which is a serious topic that you guys aren't taking seriously. You're putting imaginary things on lists that shouldn't be. Make the list small, make it realistic. That's what I'd like to see.
If you read,
thank you, Carrie.
Time has elapsed.
If you read the list, if you read what the vote was, there's going to be a 15-foot wide path to connect Heritage Trail to Bailey's Hill, 30-foot wide property abutting the golf course to clear encroachments of the first tee. So there is rights of ways there. Nobody says there isn't, but clearly the town voted democratically to sell those. We have been down this path 3 or 4 times, and now you're going to beat it up again, and to do that is a big mistake. Just sell them.
Enzo, who's doing that? Who is doing that?
Mike, your committee keeps bringing it up. You guys keep.
They can make a recommendation.
Bringing what up?
Recommendation.
Oh, come on, Mark. Okay,
Enzo, stop.
So the recommendation should be just to leave it
alone
alone
for a second. Right? Mute him for a second, please.
Mark, should the recommendation be just to sell them?
The recommendation will.
The recommendation for the housing production plan has nothing to do with the vote of town meeting. They're 2 different things, Enzo.
Okay, but you,
All
so,
right.
so you can sit there and tell me you guys are not leading up to possibly using some of that property to go back to town meeting and develop it again.
I will not do anything at that property that town meeting doesn't approve.
So who's gonna write the article to do it?
Anybody can
Who
write the article.
Anyone can write an
Anyone
article. Anyone could,
Anyone can.
since
I-
2021, if
I've
people
been down
didn't
this
like the
path.
decision from that vote, Enzo,
I
someone
clearly,
could have put forth a new article to change it or repeal it, and no one has.
I'm not trying to pick a fight. All I'm trying to do is say, look, this has been brought up so many times and it has to be put to bed. I understand that, and so many other people understand it. So many people have said, I thought we were selling them to make a profit. That's what I hear.
We've heard your opinion. Can we move on now, please?
You, Enzo.
You,
Thank
you-
you.
next,
Dana,
Hi, can you hear me?
yes. You have 5 minutes.
Yeah, I'm gonna make it quick. I just want to make an observation. The Coast Guard housing, we voted for that as a town, and it is kind of a distraction. I got to go along with Kerry, and it's gonna hurt what your committee's trying to do, which is develop a housing production plan. But that's a comment. The next thing is a question. The question is about the Greystone Road property. Has there been any discussion of making that 2 properties? Because they are on two different streets. One backs up the Greystone, the other goes behind the police station. And, they are sort of divided by a cliff in there. So has there been a discussion about dividing it into two development opportunities?
Sure. I
Not
mean,
yet.
that anything's possible. There's over 3 acres, and it just depends on what, we as a committee can come up with that makes sense. Dividing them, it could be, 2 or 3 different development opportunities that can
Right.
still achieve the affordable housing goals.
That might be helpful too, because if you made it 3, actually, the middle portion of the land in there backs up to the Spindrift, which would give the Nahant Housing Authority a chance to put an addition on their building or another building entirely, and to add some units. So that might be helpful.
Thank you. All right.
I have a question, Michelle. This is Sheila Hambleton, 17 Kenny Ave.
Thanks, Sheila.
Hi, I know you were talking about the High Street and, Greystone Road property, the old pit area behind the Spindrift. And I thought that had already been placed as the expansion of the cemetery and lots had been sold. And
I don't
that
know.
was about 20 years ago.
I don't
But
know
they-
about lots being sold. My understanding is you couldn't purchase a lot until you had a death in the family.
No,
It was
that's not. No, we
meeting.
considered the property for the expansion of the cemetery 20 or so
20.
years ago. And I believe some part of that property, I know Dana just brought up, there were 2 sections separated by a cliff, High Street and Greystone Road. It's still possible to, in my opinion, to continue the High Street section as an expansion of the cemetery if needed, in the lower part of the property for affordable housing. But nothing's been sold. Nothing's been agreed to. It was just an investigation.
Okay. Thank you, Mark. Enzo, do you have anything else you want to say?
Yeah,
Any other
sure.
questions?
I believe Mark is correct. The town did not voted against expanding the cemetery, funding it. So maybe 3 or 4 years ago. So I think that the cemetery expansion failed at a town meeting, if I'm correct.
We never got to town meeting.
It was never a town meeting, but
Never got there.
we never voted on it, Enzo. You're right.
That's all.
Thank you. I thought, Suzanne, you have a question?
Just to follow up on that, just to understand how things work in town. So would the Nahant residents get to vote on the use of that piece of land? Would we vote to use it as an extension of the cemetery or to use it as affordable? Is that how it works procedurally?
Yes, it would have to be zoned appropriately and it would have to be approved by town meeting.
Okay,
Well,
thank you.
if we're sold, right, we haven't, yeah, that's not been decided by us anyway.
That's correct, Patrick.
That's right.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Any other questions from members of the public who have not spoken yet? Any questions or comments from members of the committee? Enzo, I see your hand raised. Do you have another
Oh.
comment, question?
No, I'm sorry. Let me put my
Okay.
hand down.
No problem. All right, I have 8:33 PM. Could I get a motion from the committee to
So
adjourn?
moved.
Seconded.
So moved by Michael, a second by Jim. We're going to go through a roll call vote. Patrick,
Aye.
Patty,
Aye.
Michael,
Aye.
Lynn,
Yes.
Jim,
Yes.
Mark.
Yes.
The chair is aye. It is 8:33 PM. Thank you everyone for attending tonight. Thank you from the members of the public for your questions and comments. We'll
Are
be
we on
meeting
for
again.
next week?
We should be on
next
for
week?
next week. I'll send in a written update to let the committee know. Have a great
Is the-
night, great weekend. Happy Labor Day.
Thank you, Michelle.
Take
Thank
care.
you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.